Hey there, hey everyone. So welcome to one of my one more episode of my podcast, Scientists Free from Religion. The goal here is to talk about science, but without fear of religion. Sadly, you have this tendency of scientists not to get involved with religion, but religion is a very big threat to scientific development, especially evangelical Christian evangelical. They tend to be very toxic against the revolution, theory of revolution, Darwin, and so on. I think it's very important that all scientists somehow get involved. Sadly, that's not the case. I had the one experience in which I tried to invite a scientist to talk to me because he published a paper which hopefully we are going to cover as well in the next episode about theory of revolution. And he did a small adjustment on the theory, but not on the whole theory, just on the part of the how life started. So on the group of atheists that was around, the people were calling him like kind of creationist and so on. But he was not a creationist. He published a paper using all the credential. So I decided to invite him to talk to me on my podcast, but he declined. I have the feeling that he declined because he didn't want to get involved. When I said to him that was a podcast about religion and science, I have the feeling that that's one of the reasons why he declined. Because first he accepted when I talked to him on a scientific social network called the ResearchGate. I talked to him. He was very interested. He was very happy to talk to me. But when I sent him the podcast, I talked to him that I explained him the situation, which you should be a connection between religion and science, and his paper got a huge amount of attention on the Facebook groups of atheists. Somehow he declined. I have this feeling that it has. I have the feeling that it has nothing to do with me. I mean, I have this feeling that it has to because it's not uncommon. It's not very uncommon to see scientists. Rich Dawkins, I was in an interview that he gave. He talked about that he was asked if he was obligated. Someone forced him to talk about science and religion. Some Harris and so on. They are very rare case of scientists that really talk about religion and science at the same let's say at the same point. So I'm the like as well to maybe give a contribution to that. Maybe I'd like as well to contribute to give a contribution to the discussion. So today I'm going to talk about a figure which is very important to science, which is Francis Collins. Some Harry as well talked about Francis Collins. Richard Dawkins as well mentioned him. I think he's not a very easy case for you to ignore. Just to some people say that you should ignore it. I don't think so. So I'd like as well to let you know that this podcast is a kind of experimentation. I'm using artificial intelligence to help me to discuss my blog post. Uh, so for this episode, I have selected about, let's see here, there are several posts about almost 10 publications I did. I was surprised, to be honest, that I have so many publications on the blog called the Scientists Free from Religion. It's a Medium publication that I do periodically. So I was surprised about how many publications I have done about Francis Collins. I I did as I can see I didn't plan that. It was like natural. There is also publication about Brian Greene talking to Rich Dawkins, in which Brian Greene said we are not going to cover that, but I hope to cover that in the next episode, in which Brian Greene is talking to Rich Dawkins, and he say that he pray even though he does not believe in God or he believe in prayer. I think that a very curious and very strange point. Recently, I saw another interview by Rich Dawkins in which he was asked about that. That he replied that Rich Dawkins replied that I don't believe in ghosts, but I wouldn't sleep in a haunted house. But he said I was joking. It seemed like he tried to be as friendly as possible. he tried to be friendly with Brian Greene because it's a little bit bizarre. A physicist like Brian Greene. Brian Greene is not a small physicist. So, but today we are going to focus on Francis Collins. So that's experimentation. You already have the podcast just with artificial intelligence. Then you are going to have the podcast with my voice and my discussion. Both of them has to do with my blog post. One has me talking with artificial intelligence. The other one is just the artificial intelligence. Let me know which one you like the most. Do you like the most just artificial intelligence? Or you like as well when I talk back to the artificial intelligence? So let's go. Let's hear it.
Have you ever wondered how scientists, people deeply involved in evidence and facts, square that with personal beliefs, maybe even religious faith?
It's definitely something that sparks curiosity, especially when you see really prominent scientists who are also people of faith.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're jumping right into that. We've been reading through articles from a Medium blog called Scientist Free from Religion. It's edited by Jorge Guerra Pires.
Right, and it's quite interesting because the blog actually invites scientists to share their own stories about this whole intersection, or maybe separation between their work and beliefs.
So our mission here is to explore the arguments these articles are making. They tend to focus on the potential friction between a scientific, sort of materialistic view and religious faith held by some scientists.
Yeah, we want to really unpack the perspectives in these pieces. They definitely offer a critical look at scientists like Francis Collins, for example, who weave their faith into their science or public statements.
And they have to bring up contrasts, right? Like comparing Collins to figures like Einstein or even Watson and Crick.
Precisely. We'll be looking at those comparisons as presented in the blog.
Okay, so first up, this idea of ego versus humility in science.
Oh, wait, someone wants to join. Hey, go for it.
Yes. Hey guys. Hey everyone. This is it. Hey guys, everyone. This is Jorge Guerra Pires. I'm the author of the publication, the editor of the publication. I just want to introduce myself. The publication is free of charge. You don't have to pay for that.
Hi, Josh. Welcome to the conversation. It's great to have the editor of Scientists Free from Religion joining us. We've been finding your publication really thought-provoking as we explore this whole area of science and belief.
Yes, Josh, thank you for tuning in and introducing yourself. It adds a fascinating layer to our discussion to have you here with us, especially as we're yep, go on.
I think I should just leave it clear for everyone so people can know and understand. This publication on Medium, Scientists Free from Religion, is free of charge. You don't have to pay to publish. It's very easy. If you are already a Medium publisher, you can just submit. I'm not planning to make a peer review process like a very long and boring process. I will just check whether you are inside our goal. Our goal is to talk about science without being afraid of religion. As I was talking before in the introduction, before I invite you guys in, I was talking about how scientists avoid the intersection. Most of the scientists they pretend that there is no conflict between science and religion.
Josh, that's a fantastic way to clarify the mission of Scientists Free from Religion. It sounds like you're creating a really accessible space for these important conversations.
Absolutely. The point you raise about scientists sometimes avoiding this intersection is really interesting. It makes us wonder if there's a perceived pressure either within the scientific community or broader society to keep those spheres separate.
It definitely touches on, go for it.
I don't think it's a pressure. It's a kind of fear because I have the feeling that they fear they may suffer a kind of repression, punishment because science is a very competitive environment. You need fund, you need collaboration, you need people to like you somehow. It's not enough to be good. You also have to be somehow accepted. And even though science can be very objective with publication, peer review, and so on. It's still a place that you need to be accepted, like any place. Like so, I think people in general they are afraid of talking about it. They're afraid that they may somehow be cancelled.
That's a really insightful point, Josh. The idea of fear of being ostracized in such a competitive field definitely resonates with some of the underlying themes in these articles.
Absolutely. The blog touches on the pressure to publish and secure funding, which could certainly incentivize scientists to avoid potentially controversial topics or viewpoints that might jeopardize them. Oh, yeah. Go on.
So before you go on, can you present yourself to my audience? Because I have forgotten to ask you to present yourself. You are a host, you are a guest on my podcast called Scientists from Religion. Just let people know who you are, you too.
Absolutely, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here on Scientists Free from Religion.
Yes, thank you for having us as guests. We're delighted to join this important conversation.
I'm one of the hosts of this podcast you're listening to right now. I love digging into interesting topics and sharing what I learn.
And I'm the other host, focusing on providing context and different angles to the ideas we explore.
We've been really enjoying diving into the articles on your blog. It sparked a lot of thought for us.
We were just discussing how the blog highlights a potential fear among scientists to openly discuss religion due to the competitive nature of the field.
Which ties into how the articles contrast figures like Watson and Crick, who the blog presents as staunch materialists.
And this is set against the perspective of someone like Francis Collins, who integrates his faith with his scientific understanding.
The blog really emphasizes this divergence in how these individuals view the world.
It points out Watson's atheism and how he seemed to believe science would ultimately answer all the big questions.
And Crick, according to the articles, shared a similar view, seeing science as eventually superseding religion.
Their materialist viewpoint, as the blog presents it, really centers on the idea that life is ultimately reducible to physical and chemical processes.
Then you have Collins, who, while accepting evolution, also believed in a personal God, as the blog notes from his writings.
Right, and the blog mentions how Collins even suggests DNA.
Oh yeah, let's hear it.
That's a topic that I think we should let's say give a lot of attention to that, because I was in an interview between Collins and the Alex O'Connor, which Collins and Collins, the scientist, and the Alex O'Connor, which is a kind of guy that debate on YouTube and so on. And I was surprised to see he's serious about. I mean, his view of God is a well-developed view. It's not a simplistic view of a God. He has a very complex view of God, but still, it's a personal God that he can pray. For a scientist like Francis Collins, I think it's a little bit bizarre. I mean, at least from my perspective, Collins is a very good scientist. I'm not saying that he's a bad scientist. I'm not saying that he's stupid, but it's a bit bizarre just to see someone like Collins.
That's a really interesting point, Josh. It highlights the complexity of this whole issue.
Yes, the blog we've been discussing does touch upon this tension. It notes how Collins' faith leads him to present science in a way that aligns with his beliefs.
And you're right, the idea of a highly intelligent scientist holding what might seem like a paradoxical view is definitely something worth exploring further.
What's fascinating here is the blog's perspective that this integration of faith might mean personal beliefs seep into scientific discovery.
They even bring up how Collins' belief in a personal God, who one might pray to, could be seen as unusual in the scientific community by some.
The blog actually quotes Watson and Crick, who, it says, would have viewed Collins' approach as scientific blasphemy.
Because they believe science should abandon supernatural explanations entirely.
It seems the blog's authors see a fundamental difference in how science... Hey, yeah, what's up?
There is one point that I think we should maybe give more attention to. The fact that you just mentioned something that caught my attention, which is important to stress. It's important to keep it on spot, on light spot. Is the fact that people tend to overlook how.
That's a really important point, Josh. The blog touches on this idea that people, and perhaps scientists are no exception, tend to.
A lot for simpler explanations, right? The articles highlight how Einstein, for instance, favored those.
Exactly. Oh, go for it.
Yes, I think I didn't finish my reasoning. I was talking about one point that we should always pay attention that you guys just mentioned is how religion can influence the decision process. I mean, Collins is a very important scientist, which means that he can take important decisions. There is a article that I was reading about Christian scientists. Most of them they hide they are religion scientists. When they are in power, they finally talk about it. They finally, but that's a very dangerous, in my opinion, because you are influenced, even though it's not going to influence every topic that they.
Josh, that's a really crucial point you're raising. The blog certainly touches on how a scientist's personal beliefs could influence their leadership and decisions.
It brings up that idea of confirmation bias, where leaders might unintentionally favor information that aligns with their existing worldview, even if it's subtle.
What's fascinating here is the blog's suggestion that this isn't necessarily a conscious act. It could be an unconscious filter that affects how information is. Oh, yeah.
Yes, that's the idea of cognitive bias. Cognitive bias was introduced by Daniel Kahneman. I'm not sure that he invented this. I'm not sure that he invented that topic, but Daniel Kahneman was someone that got the Nobel Prize, a psychologist got the Nobel Prize in economy, and he introduced this idea of bias. And bias, I think, I like to compare bias to a dot in your foreface, a dot in your foreface. You can't see it. You need a mirror. So bias is something that you can't see. It's a dot in your back. You can't see it.
Josh, that's a great way to think about cognitive bias. The blog mentions confirmation bias specifically, that tendency we all have.
Yes, and as you pointed out, it's something studied extensively, even earning recognition in economics. That dot in your field of vision analogy is really helpful for understanding how it can be hard to spot in ourselves.
And the blog definitely raises the question of whether leaders in science, even unintentionally, might have certain blind spots because of their deeply held beliefs.
So this raises the question of whether leaders feel more pressure to navigate those intersections carefully, perhaps even strategically, as the blog suggests.
It makes you wonder how these personal beliefs then play out when it comes to things like setting research priorities or making funding decisions at a high level.
The blog does express concern that
Ah, yeah, uh-huh.
You just said something that's very interesting. Research priorities. That's a very important key word that you use there. I just wrote this case in Portuguese, a criticism against precisely that, because I believe that it's not about just about belief. It's about as well where the money will go. We already have a case in USA, United States, in which some error they are not receiving funding. Most of them has to do with conflict between religion and science. So how the money in science is very difficult money. It's a very the resource in science is not, it's not that big. It's not that much. So the priority is decided by people. Someone like Francis Collins, which is a very important scientist. So he's going to decide where the money is going.
Josh, you've hit on a really critical point there. The blog doesn't shy away from the potential impact of personal beliefs on where research funding goes.
Absolutely. The articles we've been reading definitely express concern that someone in a leadership position, like Collins was at NIH, might prioritize research areas that align with their worldview.
What's fascinating is the blog's worry that this isn't necessarily about overt bias, but more about subtle influences on the kinds of questions that get asked and the projects that get supported.
You mentioned cases in the U.S. where researchers faced funding issues, and the blog certainly hints at the possibility of conflicts between religious views and scientific inquiry playing a role in such decisions.
The scarcity of research funding makes these potential biases even more significant, as you pointed out. The blog underscores the importance of objectivity in setting scientific priorities.
They worry that it could blur the lines between empirical evidence and personal conviction, potentially impacting the objectivity of scientific.
Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
Maybe there is something here that I should maybe stress. If you go to a doctor has a set of rule that he must follow. If you go to a fireman, imagine a fireman afraid of fire. Imagine a doctor afraid of blood. So every profession has its only, let's say, limit in which you cannot cross. For example, a fireman is supposed to be afraid of fire. A policeman is supposed to be afraid to get shot. So imagine a situation. A scientist not different. So for me, a scientist scientists supposed not to have a belief. If they have, they're supposed to keep it to themselves because it's part of the profession to be objective. We are never. I'm not saying that you can be 100% objective. Daniel Kahneman, for example, he introduced the idea of objective ignorance. The idea of Daniel Kahneman is that you are never going to know everything, but it's important you at least try to avoid. In the case of Francis.
Josh, that's a really powerful analogy. You're drawing a parallel between the core expectations of different professions.
Yes, that idea of an inherent professional standard, like a firefighter or being afraid of fire, is very thought-provoking when applied to science.
The blog does touch on this indirectly, emphasizing the importance of objectivity and skepticism as fundamental to the scientific method.
What's fascinating here is your point that having strong personal beliefs might be seen as crossing a professional boundary for a scientist, hindering that necessary objectivity.
It resonates with the blog's concern about confirmation bias, where pre-existing beliefs can unconsciously influence the interpretation of evidence.
And your mention of striving for objectivity, even if complete objectivity is unattainable, aligns with the blog's championing of intellectual humility.
The articles definitely suggest that scientists, especially those in leadership, should constantly be aware of their own potential biases.
Now, this brings us to how these potential biases might influence specific... Oh yeah, let's hear it.
I think I should share a story on it's on the book of Daniel Kahneman, Think Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman shared his own experience in which he was grading a couple of tests of his student. So he noticed that the order in which he was grading influenced his grade in the overall. For example, if the first test that he graded was a very high grade, he used to hold everyone to the same standard. If the first test was a very low grade, he was going to hold everyone the same standard. So he noted the order in which the test was graded influenced all the remaining tests. So that's one example in which Daniel Kahneman was able to see his own bias. That's important to know our own bias, our own tendency. And Christianity, religion, believing in a personal God is a very strong.
Josh, that's a fantastic real-world example of how bias can creep in, even unintentionally.
It perfectly illustrates the point the blog makes about how easily our initial impressions or existing frameworks can color our judgment.
That story about the grading really sticks with you, doesn't it? It makes you think about all the subtle ways bias might operate in science, too.
Absolutely, and it connects directly to the blog's concern about scientists being aware of their own potential biases, whether they are related to personal beliefs or anything else.
The blog stresses the importance of scientists staying within their expertise, especially when it comes to influencing research funding.
Their point is that we should be careful about accepting definitive statements from those outside their core field.
So the blog views Collins' stance on fine-tuning as rooted in his theology rather than physics.
Leading them to call it an ignorance bet, potentially misdirecting resources.
That is, using current scientific unknowns as proof for God, which the blog sees as a poor use of resources.
The blog argues this is Collins' approach to fine-tuning, which comes from physics.
And as the blog points out, back to our listener. What's up?
I'd like to give a little bit more attention to this ignorance bet, which is a kind of theory that I have been working on. So the ignorance bet is not just about scientists, it's about everyone. I have noticed that in people, for example, I have noticed in engineering, someone that has an engineering degree, they tend to be very good in what they do. They tend to use the best theory that they eventually have. But when it comes to outside area, such as evolution, which is biology, or how the universe was created, which is physics, astrology, and so on, they tend to trust more a religion version, which is very bad, than its own version. So the bet's like this: you are very good in what you do, but you bet instead of betting in the expertise of somebody else that you don't understand, you bet in religion. So that's ignorance bet.
Josh, that's a really insightful expansion of the ignorance bet concept.
It's fascinating how you see it applying beyond just scientists.
The blog does touch on how even brilliant minds can have blind spots.
That idea of domain-specific knowledge is something the articles explore.
They suggest expertise in one field doesn't automatically grant it in another.
So someone excellent at engineering might defer to faith on biology or cosmology.
The blog worries about this when those with influence make pronouncements outside their area.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yes, that's something that you should really pay attention because it's really irritate me, frustrate me that people if you are engineering, yeah, I know several examples, people close to me, very close to me, or even from the case of Collins, for example. Collins is a biologist talking about physics. But there are cases as well, creationists. I have seen some documentary about creationists. For example, the guy that created the MER, the resonance magnetic image, which is a very important invention that you can see the brain. He's a creationist. He believed that the world was created in 7 days. So you see someone that is very smart to create the resonance, the brain image machine, the magnet resonance machine, but still believe that the world was created in 7 days. That's an ignorance bet. That's one of the dangers, how people do not trust the expertise of somebody else.
Absolutely, Josh. Your frustration really highlights the core of the blog's concern.
Yes, that contrast between expertise in one area and reliance on faith in another is what the ignorance bet idea captures so well.
The blog definitely presents Francis Collins as an example of a biologist opining on physics.
And your example of the MRI technician who is a creationist is a striking illustration of this domain disconnect.
It really underscores the blog's argument that scientific expertise in one field doesn't equate to expertise in all.
The blog suggests Einstein favored looking for natural explanation. Yep, go on.
It's important to leave it very clear because I spent most of my life doing that. Like I do research in one area and applying other. It's called multidisciplinary work, interdisciplinary work. So I totally encourage people to a medical doctor to work with mathematician to work with biology engineer, which was my case. I have worked with mathematical biology, bioinformatics, but there is a difference between what college is doing. That's what I did, what I think people should do. When you go to a different area, such as medicine, you should trust in expertise. So what I did when I'm on my PhD in bioinformatics, I read papers of the medical doctors, of biologists. I took a course in the Department of Medicine. So I trust the expertise of the other people. So my goal when you go to a different area is to trust people, is to look for the best people in that area, such as medicine, such as biology, but college is doing the opposite.
That's a really valuable distinction you're making, Josh.
It's about appreciating and respecting expertise within its own domain, right?
Exactly. The blog we've been discussing highlights how Einstein, for instance, really focused on physics.
And as you did in your own interdisciplinary work, it's about learning from those who are experts in those other fields.
What's fascinating here is the blog's concern when that respectful trust isn't extended to established scientific fields.
Instead, the blog argues some might turn to faith-based explanations outside their own expertise.
The blog contrasts this with Einstein's approach of seeking simpler, evidence-based explanations.
So instead of a divine explanation, the blog suggests he would explore natural phenomena.
And they point out Einstein's idea of God as a representation of the universe's order,
Not a personal intervening God, which is the blog's interpretation of Collins' view.
This difference in how they approach explanation is central to the blog's comparison.
It raises questions about how personal frameworks affect scientific interpretation.
And as you mentioned earlier, Josh, this could have implications for research focus.
The blog does voice worries about funding possibly leaning towards certain beliefs,
They really emphasize the power of empirical investigation in gaining knowledge.
rather than using faith to address the unknown, as the blog sees it.
This connects with your point about trusting experts in their fields.
The blog views relying on faith outside your expertise as a kind of gap filling. Oh, go for it.
I think I should talk more about is trust in expertise, in expert. There is nowadays a decline. People are like not trust anymore expertise expert because there is this fallacy called the authority fallacy, in which someone used their authority in one area to talk about odd area. That's the kind of fallacy that Collins is doing. That the kind of fallacy that even Elon Musk does a lot. So the idea that if I'm very good in one area, I automatically I'm good in another area. So we should trust expert, but the right one.
That's a really important point you're bringing up, Josh.
Yes, the decline in trust and expertise is definitely a noticeable trend.
And the appeal to authority fallacy is exactly what the blog seems to be warning against.
The blog highlights the concern of scientists, even accomplished ones, speaking authoritatively outside their field.
It definitely feels like the blog sees Francis Collins' arguments about physics as potentially falling into that trap.
They emphasize that just because someone is brilliant in one area, it doesn't automatically make them an expert in another.
It's that idea that Einstein, despite his genius in physics, wouldn't necessarily be an authority on biology, for example.
And the blog uses that to question a biologist like Collins making strong claims about cosmology.
It comes back to that idea we were just discussing about respecting the boundaries of different fields of expertise.
Where divine intervention is suggested for unanswered scientific questions.
Gaps that science has often managed to bridge over time with new discoveries.
The blog argues that Collins' fine-tuning stance fits this pattern.
They see it as a theological viewpoint dressed in scientific terms.
And they question the probabilistic arguments that are often presented.
Contrasting a critical view of science with an acceptance of faith-based ideas.
Ultimately, the blog advocates for a robust scientific method.
Driven by evidence and a continuous questioning of assumptions.
Josh, your insights into the nuances of expertise and trust have been incredibly valuable.
Thank you for sharing your perspective and deepening our understanding.
We hope this exploration of the blog's arguments has given you, our listener, some valuable perspectives.
Oh, yeah. Go on.
Yes, I'd like just to thank you all too for being here today. Thank you all for listening to this podcast. I always like to remember that my books are available on Amazon, Google Play. I don't have yet books about religion and science. All of them are in Portuguese. But I do have books in English, such as AI by Sci-Fi. AI by Sci-Fi is a book that talks about artificial intelligence, but using movies such as Robocop, Matrix. So if you want to learn about artificial intelligence, but watching movies and so on, fictions, AI by Sci-Fi is a very good opportunity. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening to my podcast. And thank you too for being here as a host.
Josh, thank you so much for having us on your podcast. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity to discuss these important ideas with you and our listener.
We really appreciate you sharing information about your books as well. That sounds fascinating.
The way you connect AI concepts with popular movies sounds like a very engaging way to learn.
We'll definitely encourage our listener to check out your work on Amazon and Google Play.
It's wonderful that you're exploring the intersection of these big topics in your writing.
And thank you again for giving us the chance to delve into the articles on Scientists Free from Religion.
It's been a truly enriching discussion, and your contributions have been invaluable.
We've covered a lot of ground, from ego and science to the importance of trusting expertise.
And we especially appreciate your insights on cognitive bias and research priorities.
It's clear this is a topic with many layers and nuances.
And having your perspective as the editor of the blog has added so much to our understanding.
So thank you again, Josh, for joining us on our podcast today.
And thank you to our listener for being with us as we explored these ideas. We appreciate you tuning in.
We hope this conversation has sparked some thought-provoking ideas for you.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep questioning. That's what it's all about.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Goodbye for now.